Hey, all you game designers out there. We've been doing a tutorial on GameMaker Studio, doing GameMaker language and using Sean Spalding's mechanics for doing a platformer game. And I'd like to expand upon that by adding animation to it. And so let me show you the animation that we're planning on doing. So what we're going to do is we're going to group. So what we're going to do is we're going to animate different what we call states. In fact, this video presentation is all about states. In fact, here, let me, in fact. All right, let's just talk about this. So today we're gonna talk about sprites and animation states. So I think by the time we're done here, you should be able to know how to import animated sprites, figure out how to switch those sprites using GameMaker language, be able to explain what this term state means in computer science, and then explain a little bit about what a finite state machine is and just generally how it works. And then we're going to apply a finite state machine to control the animation of a player character. So that's a lot, and you've probably heard some terms that you don't use a lot. A finite state machine is not something that most people know about. It's very much a computer science concept. However, it's not as difficult as it may seem. Before I explain any of that, let's just talk about credit. I want to give credit where credit is due. Sean Spalding is a game developer. He has hosted wonderful videos, and in able to kind of prepare myself for it, I was looking at his animation tutorial and his state machine tutorial, and then I got some information from Coding AI, finite state machines, and making Zelda in Game Maker. And I'm going to include those links in my video on YouTube at the bottom. So you can take a look at those there. I'm going to add it. So now that you know what we're doing, I have to explain this next section here, which is the phrase that pays. And this is designed for my students as we are doing remote distance learning and everyone's learning from home or wherever. I'm allowing students to get credit for having watched the video, and they get extra credit for obviously completing the tutorial. But by watching it, in order to get credit, they need to be able to recite what these phrases are. They're called the phrase that pays. And each one is related to the concept of what we're doing in the tutorial. So we're going to get to that a little bit later. But for now, let's just talk about animated sprites. Okay, so the image assets that we're getting is called Ninja Girl, and it comes from opengameart.org. But as I'm trying to go into their site, it seems they're having some trouble. So I'm wondering if there's some kind of an issue with their servers. They may have some kind of a denial of service attack or something like it. What I did is I downloaded from here, and it's called Ninja Girl. And we'll go, sorry, that's recycled bin. Let's go to downloads, and Ninja Girl is what the asset's called. And when you extract it, you'll get this folder. And in here, you'll see a PNG folder, and you'll see all these graphics for Ninja Girl. And so this is sort of bringing us to the concept of states. And so we have an attack animation, a dead animation. We have idle, jump, and then we got a jump throw, jump attack, run, slide. That would be kind of fun, and even a throw. And we even have the object, the little thing that she's throwing right there, a kunai apparently. Anyway, so Ninja Girl, and we have these different animations. So each animation, we're only going to be animating one of these at any given time, and that's really an animation state. But let's talk a little bit more about states and animation states. So I'd like to take you to Techipedia, which is a great site for getting definitions of computer science terms. So we're going to go ahead and define what state means. And you might think about things like people talking about what was that person's state of mind, and or um, um, the State of the Union address is something that the president makes to talk about where are we as a country and how's that going. That's the state of the country. If you look here, we're going to go ahead and define it. The state of a program is defined as its condition regarding stored inputs. The term state here is used similarly to how it is used in science. So like the state of an object could be a gas, liquid, or solid. So that's the physical makeup. So the state of a computer programming is like its values or contents. Now, a finite state machine is a little bit different. So I'm going to give you a couple examples. So let me pull those up. And so this is a traffic light. So the traffic light, maybe at the beginning it gets turned on and it's green for 360 seconds, and then it turns yellow for 10 seconds, and then it goes to red. And then from red, it's going to go right back to green. So this is the state machine, and it's always going in a finite direction, right? And you could go back and forth between states in some cases, but in the case of a traffic light, you're really only going to do it this way. So the state of the traffic light is it's going to be green, yellow, or red. It's never going to be green and yellow. That would be confusing. It would never be green and red. That would be pretty bad, right? So you don't want to do anything like that. So that's like a finite state machine. Let's take a look at a game example. In fact, we're actually going to look at Unity. And I do some work with Unity, and it's a lot of fun. And it can be confusing and complex, but they have a really cool thing called an animator. And this animator is a finite state machine. And let's think about your character, this character over here. And grounded means you're standing on a platform on the ground, on a building, a ledge, or whatever, but you're standing on it. So you could just as easily say standing. Entry would be like when the game starts or the room starts or the character is spawned. We go from entry to grounded. And there's just like this automatic. We go straight to being grounded. And then you might, from grounded, you might jump, right? So you could, when you're on the ground, you could jump up, right? But you're never going to get back to the ground until you start falling back down. Fortunately, gravity will bring you back down. So we go from jumping, and suddenly you start coming back down, you're going to falling. And then eventually you're going to either fall onto the ground, or possibly as you're falling, you can grab onto a ledge. Let's say you jump off of a building, you try to land on another building, and you grab onto the ledge. And then from the ledge, you could start falling again, right? And then you could fall to the ground. So it's just how you go from one to another. Now you can jump up and grab onto a ledge. So you can go from grounded to jumping to ledge hang. But you can't go from grounded directly to ledge hang. Although if you have a ledge that's just like 5 feet tall, you might just walk over, grab it, and then lift up your feet. But that's not really realistic in a game, so we're not going to go there. But it's the idea of there's direction where you go from one state to another, and then there's conditions. How do we go from one to another? All right, so let's take a look at the game that we were working on. And I'm going to go ahead and run this. And you'll notice at the beginning, the green box is going to fall. So we're falling, but now we're grounded. And we're going to move to the right. Notice we start moving, and then I can jump. So I'm jumping, now I'm falling, I'm jumping and falling, and then I'm moving and jumping. And then if I go off the side, I fall, right? Okay, so those are different sort of states. You know, you're grounded, you're jumping, you're falling, right? You're colliding. There's other states like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab our animation, these sprites here. They are quite large, and you'll see in a moment. But we're going to go ahead and add these animated sprites. So I'm going to right click on sprite. I'm going to use create sprite from images. Okay, so, oh wait, before I do that, let's go ahead and organize this as a folder. So we're going to, under sprites, we're going to add a group, and we're going to call it player. We could even call it G player for group player. And then I'm going to right click and I'm going to create sprite from image. And now we're going to go ahead. We're going to do idle. From idle 0 to idle 09. That means there are 10 in all. And I'm going to open them up. There we are. If you want to see what idle looks like, we can go ahead and animate it. And there's our ninja girl when she's just standing. And idle is a very common term to describe the sprite is just there. Now, we're going to use the naming convention we did before. So it's S player, and then we're going to type idle with a capital I. Sprite player idle. Okay, let's go ahead and grab this out. I'm going to stop the animation. I'm going to do the same thing for, I'm going to go ahead and do create sprite from images. We're going to do running. Run from 0 all the way to run 0, 0, 9. So I'm going to hold down shift. So I select them all 10, and I click open. And then we're going to name it right here, S player running. And let's go ahead and watch her run. There she goes. Pretty cool. But look at how tall. It's a height of 520. Our player over here only had a height of 64. So we're going to have to deal with that in a moment. But before I do, let's go ahead and add some more. Now, we're going to separate the jumping up from the falling. And that's because I like that idea. You could be on a ledge and go off the ledge, and you would not be jumping up. And the first half of jumping up, the animation for jumping up is a little different from falling down. So we're going to select the first 5 from jump 0 to jump 0, 4. And then we're going to call that S player jumping. All right, we'll go ahead and animate her jumping. And we'll kind of like look here, 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 and we're at the apex of the jump, and then she's going to start moving as she goes down. So now I'm going to right click and I'm going to create one more sprite, which is just going to be the remaining jumps from jump 5 to jump 9. Hold down shift, select them all, click open, S, player, falling now. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to resize our image. And I'm going to use the idle stance as my reference. You'll notice that's 500 pixels tall, so we're going to resize this to only be 100 pixels tall. However, we got to be careful. If you're going to resize your sprites because you've imported them like I have, you want to double check and look at your different heights. Now, each of these animated sprites have a different height, so this is going to cause some problems. So if we're going to have to resize all of these, we should resize them as a percentage so that they'll all be relative to the character, not, each one is the same exact height, because it takes a little bit more to do some jumping. Jump needs to be taller because we need to have that character moving up, moving down, that kind of a thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to idle. We're going to click where it says size, and we're going to resize it. We're going to do what's called scale image. And it looks weird over here, the preview already looks weird, and that's not changing anything. So don't let this thing freak you out. So we're going to go over here, and we're going to scale in percent. And to get 100, that's going to be 20% of 500. I'm going to click apply, and now it's width of 58, height of 100. The other thing I recommend we do, and let's just drag this thing out. Let's zoom in just a little bit. Notice the origin is way over here. What we need to do is move our origin to top center. I think is the best way to do it. And the reason why is if the character is facing left, we want to just flip the sprite, and it's going to flip around the origin. So top center is good, but we're going to lock it. Now that we've resized it, we're going to do the same thing for the others. So remember, we're scaling in percent, and we're doing it as 20. And because its maintain aspect ratio is checked, it also adjusts the width accordingly. So that's another thing you got to think about. Make sure we do top center. And I like to lock these when I'm done so I can't accidentally mess it up. Player jumping, size, percent, double click, change to 20, make sure that's checked, click apply, top center, lock it in, falling. Okay, let's just double check all these. Height of 100, locked top center. I'm really more checking top center. That one's 104. So they're going to be slightly different heights. Okay. Now, an interesting thing is, we're going to go ahead and keep it top center, but I wonder if the animation gets off a little bit, we may want to adjust our collision mask so that they're all the same. Okay, but at this point, like I said, 100 is sort of the secret. What we're going to do, let's change our wall object to be 100 by 100. And so I'm going to resize that. And this time, don't have to change the percentage. I'm just going to change the width and the height to 100. And now we're going to go into our room and we're going to change the grid right here to be 100 by 100. And then we're going to want to take our wall objects and adjust them as well. Okay. All right, so my sprite player, we're going to change that. That's the object player. So we're going to go to the object player and we're going to go ahead and change the sprite to Playeridle. And we're just going to go ahead and try that out. Just see how that works. There, not bad. Okay, so that's going to work okay. We can still move left, right. We can go up and down. So that's good to know. And we can fall. But the animation's not changing. We're just always in idle state. So now what we're going to do is now we're going to start going into state engines. Now, we're going to be doing some scripts. Okay, so right now, let's take a look at our object player. We have a create event. And we have some variables here. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a thing called an enum. Enum. It's shorthand for enumerator. So enumerator is like a list of constants. And we're going to do states. Yes, okay, so I'm going to change this and we're going to call it player states. And we're going to type idle. And then we're going to do running. I'm going to do jumping. I'm going to do falling. Okay. Now, later on, we could do attack. We could do other ones here. We're going to use this as a way of making it easier to see. So player states is just like this, consider this like a fancy variable. And this variable can have one of, in our case, 4 values: idle, running, jumping, falling. So if I were to put, for example, player states, and I put a dot, we have falling, idle, jumping. Okay. So this right here, player states dot idle, is actually the number 0. And player states dot running is 1. Player states dot jumping is 2. Player states dot falling is 3. So they each get a number, but they're all unique, and it can only be one of these at any given time. They never change. So it's immutable. They don't change at all. So idle will always be 0. Now, GameMaker will just assign them numbers, and that's all GameMaker cares about because it can keep track of this stuff way better than we can. However, for us, it's a lot easier to think in terms of, oh, what's our current player state? Okay. And I'm going to flat out go ahead and do a state equals player states dot idle. Okay, so now this is a variable state. Notice it's purple, just like GRV, HSP, or whatever. So in the create event of our object player, we're going to set our state to idle. So now this is basically represents each of our states. And the real key is how do we go from one state to another? And what happens when we're in each of these states? So in idle, we're not going to the left, we're not going to the right. We could go from idle to jumping, go from idle to running. We could even be, it would be hard to go from idle to falling without doing a little running first, because we're going to have to go off the edge. But if we start, we're at the beginning of the game where we initialize it to idle and we begin falling, we go straight from idle to falling. So, but that's the real key is what state are we in? What do we do when we're in that state? And what helps us go from one state to another. How do we get from one state to another? And that's what we need to manage. And it may sound confusing, but when we're done, it's actually going to be more easy because it's going to allow us later on to come up with other states like throwing or sliding or attack. And so this is going to really make it a lot more manageable as we go forward. Okay, so now we're going to do some scripting here, like I said. So we're going to start bringing some of this information and we're going to put it into other scripts. So for example, we're getting these keyboard checks, these inputs here. What we can do is we can actually make this, put this getting input into its own script. So I'm going to cut that out. And then I'm going to go open this up and we're going to create our first script. So I'm going to right click on here and choose create script. And we're going to begin by titling it SCR and it's get keyboard inputs. And I'm going to paste all that in. Okay, so SCR get keyboard inputs. We just took this information out of the game and put it into a script. If we were to run it now, because we deleted it, we're not going to be able to move. Oh, and yeah, right there, O player key right not set before reading it. Okay, so we're going to abort. So we already have a problem. We can't do anything. So let's go ahead and where we originally pulled it, let's call it. So we're going to call, well, let's just call it. So to call it a function, you type the name of it. And if you notice right here, as I start to write it, it has the underscore. It says script, and it has everything I need. I'm just going to put a semicolon there. And I'm going to save my changes. And we're going to run it, and now guess what happens? We don't get our error, and we should be able to move again. There we go. Okay. So scripts are really a great way of making sure you, like, it's a great way to clean up your code. So you're basically, instead of just putting everything all in one room, we're going to put our relevant information and organize them by scripts. Okay, so the keyboard input, anytime we want to get keyboard input, we can put it in here. If we want to get other key inputs, we just go here and we add it in. Okay, we might have like an attack or whatever. Like the space bar might be like throw, or we might do keyboard combos or whatever. All right, that being said, let's keep working. So let's go back to our object player. And let's just take a quick look at what we're doing. And actually, you know what? I haven't done any phrases that pay. So let's go ahead and do one before I forget. In our first phrase that pays, state in the context of our game means. Okay, so in the context of our game, state means, oops. It could mean a bunch of different things, but it could be, what is our character doing? Okay. In the context of our game, what is our character doing? Is it running, jumping, falling, hanging out? That would be idle. You get the idea. Okay, what's our character doing would be the state. Let's see what the next one is. Oh yeah, okay. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. And I gave you some examples of a finite state machine. I'm going to give you a sentence frame that you can use. So I'm going to go ahead because it's been 18, 20 minutes, something like that. One example of a finite state machine is, and then you could go ahead and add your own, but I'm just going to put a traffic light. A traffic light can be in one of three states: red, well, I'll start with green, be positive, yellow, and then I'll get rid of that, and that, green, yellow, or red. 3 states. Okay, so that's an example of a finite state machine. You like that? So you can pause it here, but for all of my students, we do a lot with sentence frames. And so if you want to just leave the sentence frame, you can too, or you could provide your own example. Okay, that was our second phrase, that pays. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go, we got our object player, and we're going to create some scripts for each of our states. So what we're going to do is we're going to basically manage for any state we could be in, we're going to have a script for that state. So I'm going to create a script. I'm going to call it SCR, and I'm going to put, let's see, what should I call this one? We'll put SCR, oops, Playeridle. Okay, there's our Sprite Playeridle. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide a template for all of our player animation or player states. Okay, so this is the first thing we want to do is we want to determine what do we do in the idle state. Next step, we're going to decide what states can we go into, okay, transition into, okay? So let's talk about what do we do in the idle state. First of all, we're going to want to switch to whatever that animation cycle is for sure, all right? And so, but before we do that, a lot of times you want to make sure you begin with the first frame because that can be challenging. So I'll give you sort of the code here. Actually, before I go any further, let's just define these two terms, Sprite Index. Sprite Index is the actual what sprite does the object currently have. At the beginning, we set it to sPlayerIdle. Okay, so we're going to double check when we go from one animation state to another. We're going to be in the new state, but we want to make sure, like, did we come from another sprite and therefore need to change, or are we already using that sprite? Because this is going to be running over and over and over again. As long as we're in the idle state, it's going to run this every time it does a step event. So if we are going from falling to idle, then when we first go in here, the sprite index, the sprite is not going to be idle, it's going to be falling. And if we are coming out from another sprite animation, from a different state, then we need to make sure we begin with the first frame, which is just going to be 0. Okay, now if not, that's image index, then we're going to set the sprite index. Okay, so image index is actually which of the animation ones are we talking about? Which frame are we talking about? So this is going to be frame 0. And remember, the sprites were numbered 0 to 9, so this one is going to be sprite 9. So that's going to be frame number 9, but that's also image index. Okay, so now let's go back looking at the player idle. So image index, so if we're coming from a different animation, we want to go to the very first frame. So then we're going to set that to 0. Let's talk about what states we can change into. So one format, we could say we could go into another frame, and then we have to, I like to give it a condition so we kind of see what's going on. So this is going to be sort of my template for all of my sprites, or all of my scripts. I'm going to go ahead and save this and use this to create my other scripts. So there's player idle, and we're going to just make our scripts line up with all of these animations. So I'm going to, instead of create a script, let's just right click and duplicate. Duplicate, Control D. So it's Sprite Player, and then we're going to do running, and then we're going to right click and we're going to duplicate. And the reason why we're going to duplicate is it makes it so much easier if some of that is already in place. Jumping, and then we'll duplicate that to falling. There we go. So let's just start with idle to begin with. Okay, so now we're going to say, so we're going to switch to idle animation cycle. So at the sprite index is not, and so let me just remind you, sprite index, like I said, is the actual sprite. It's a variable to represent the sprite. We could give sprite index like an integer, but it makes more sense to give it what we're calling it. So if the sprite index is not sPlayerIdle, image index is going to be 0. So we're going to reset it to 0. Okay, and let's go ahead and we'll go to that phrase that pays, and we're going to take a look at number 3. Number 3 is Sprite Index is a variable that represents the sprite we see on the screen. Okay, it's phrase at page number 3. Phrase at page number 4. The image index is a variable that represents the current frame of a sprite. In some cases, if it's not an animated sprite, like we began with the little square, it was always going to be 0. It was never going to change. But in this case, image index can represent the current frame of a sprite. So if it's animating all the way through and we're never changing what it's set at, this, every time you loop, it will be a different value. It will just keep cycling through. But if we set it to 0, then we're saying, take us to the very first frame and show that. So those are our 4 phrases that pay. Okay, so now we have all of these here. So then we're just going to copy that and we're going to paste that there. All right, and we're getting low on time. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of get this all set up, and then in my next tutorial, we're going to go to the next one. But let's just think about this. Remember, for idle, we can jump. So we're going to go to jumping. From idle, we could go to falling, right? And we could also go to running. All right, so let's think about what the jumping is going to be. What's the condition? The condition is we're grounded. Actually, not just that. We could just say that our vertical speed is a negative number. And let's go ahead and close this. We don't need all that. Let's give ourselves enough space. So if our vertical speed's a negative number, that means we're going up, because remember, a y value of 0 is the top of the screen. So if we're heading towards the top, we're jumping up. So as we're going down in our y position, also known as vertical speed, if that's a negative number, we're jumping. And this is sort of the opposite. If it's a positive number, there, oh, now it does it. Oh, that is just annoying. Most other programs do a better job of that. If we're running, the condition is horizontal speed is not 0. So those are the different conditions. Okay, we're going to jumping, to falling, to running. Go back over there. And so let's just go ahead and do a similar thing to all of our others. So if we're running, right, let's see. I'm just going to copy this and then adjust what we need. So if we're running, we could go from running directly to jumping. We could go to falling. We could go to idle. In this case, horizontal speed is 0. Okay, so you see how it's once you solve it, it's a little bit easier. And then let's go to jumping. Okay, if we're currently jumping, we could be falling. Right? So we're going up, we're coming down. We could we go straight from jumping to running? Possibly not. Yeah, I think just falling. I don't think there's any other state, right? So we're going up, we could go down, and that's about it. We wouldn't go straight to idle, and we wouldn't, yeah. Okay, and so that's key here. Sometimes if we don't do something like that, it could be really ambiguous. Okay, so if we are falling, we could go to idle. And idle would just be horizontal speed is 0. Let me just do this. Okay, so let's just double check. If we are falling, we could go from falling to idle. We could go to dead too, depending on where we land. I think that's it. All right, so let's just do one last thing and just clean all this stuff up. And I think we're going to end on there. Okay, so we're in running. S player. If we're not S player running, I'm going to set it there into 0. Save our changes. And now we're going to set that to 0. Jumping. All right, and save our changes and falling. We know that's 0. S player falling. Copy, paste. I'm going to save our changes. All right, at this point, we spent a lot of time here. And in the next tutorial, we will start coding out these different scripts and dealing with what we need to deal with. Okay, so stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for watching. We do have more on its way. Sometime next week we'll get this going. I'll try to prioritize this as quickly as I can. So thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for more.